For over 70 years, the Hells Angels have controlled the streets, fighting battles, taking down rivals, and building a name on fear and loyalty. But power brings enemies. As the Angels grew, so did the pushback. Clubs stood against them, each one trying to break their hold. Some were wiped out. Others sparked wars that spread like wildfire. These are the 15 most dangerous enemies the Hells Angels have ever faced. First, Mongols MC. In 1969, a group of Latino bikers in Montebello, California, approached the Hells Angels with hopes of joining their ranks. The answer was blunt: "You're not one of us." That rejection could have ended the story, but it didn't. Instead, those riders formed their own brotherhood, the Mongols Motorcycle Club. From day one, they moved with purpose. Therefore, it wasn't long before they started expanding across Hells Angels' core territory, i.e., East LA, Las Vegas, and Phoenix, all Hells Angels territory. That push sparked a war. The violence exploded into the public eye on April 27, 2002, inside Harrah's Casino in Laughlin, Nevada. During the annual Laughlin River Run, dozens of Mongols and Hells Angels collided. In less than 2 minutes, 3 men were dead, 2 Hells Angels shot, 1 Mongol stabbed. In 2008, the U.S. government launched Operation Black Rain, arresting over 100 Mongols and attempting to seize their name and patch, but the club didn't fold. They fought back in court and won their name back. Today, the Mongols remain over 1,500 members strong, with chapters in the US, Europe, and Australia. If the Mongols brought heat, the next one brought hell. Second, Outlaws MC. In 1994, the Outlaws shot dead a Hells Angels member in Chicago over a turf dispute, igniting one of the bloodiest biker wars in U.S. history. In retaliation, the Angels went to extreme lengths. They bombed Outlaws' clubhouse, sparking 2 years of brutal conflict in which more than 20 shootings erupted across Illinois, Indiana, and Florida, and streets littered with burned vehicles and bodies. But the violence wasn't limited to those states. On September 26, 1994, the rivalry exploded in Lancaster, New York, just outside Buffalo. At Lancaster Speedway, members of both gangs clashed after drinking for hours. That conflict also resulted in casualties. 2 men, 1 outlaw, 1 Hells Angel, were killed. 8 more were injured. Over 10 members were arrested, including Randy Mad Yeager, a top outlaw fugitive who fled for 17 years before being captured in Mexico in 2014. The Outlaws MEC are the oldest outlaw motorcycle club in the world, predating the Hells Angels by over a decade. While the Angels ruled the West, the Outlaws dominated the Midwest and East. Today, with over 1,700 members across North and South America and Europe, they remain one of the few clubs that can match the Angels blow for blow. Their legacy is one of war, territory, and a refusal to back down. While the Outlaws held their ground, the next enemy didn't just defend. They expanded like wildfire. Tercer, Bandidos MC. In the early 1990s, the Hells Angels had already planted their flag in Scandinavia, but when the Bandidos started expanding into Northern Europe, it lit a fuse. In Denmark, the Hells Angels refused to let the Bandidos establish chapters without a fight. From 1994 to 1997, the Great Nordic Biker War spread across Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland. The violence became so intense that even civilians weren't safe. But the Bandidos didn't back down. They matched firepower with firepower. The message was clear: we won't be pushed out. Even after 11 deaths and 90 injuries during the Nordic War, the Bandidos didn't retreat. They dug in deeper. Today, with over 2,500 members in 20-plus countries, they're still one of the Angels' fiercest enemies. If the Angels had enemies in the South, their real nightmares came from the Atlantic coast. Čtvrtý, Pagans MC. In 2002, the Hells Angels held a flashy biker event, the Hellraiser Ball, at an upscale venue in Long Island, New York. There were tattoo shows, celebrity guests, and more than 1,000 attendees, including children. But the real fireworks came when 10 vans full of Pagans MC members rolled up uninvited. Within seconds of entering, fists flew, knives slashed, and brass knuckles cracked skulls. One Hells Angel, Robert Dirtbag Rutherford, was stabbed to death. 10 more were hospitalized. The headlines called it a bloodbath. The Pagans called it a message: stay off our coast. The Pagans MC started as a local riding club in Maryland around 1959, but became one of the most feared forces on the East Coast. By the 1970s, they had a reputation for meth trafficking, extreme violence, and military-style discipline. They never aimed for global reach, just control of their turf. And when the Hells Angels tried to move in, the Pagans struck back hard. With roughly 900 members across 12 states, the Pagans remain small but savage. And to this day, they're one of the few clubs the Hells Angels genuinely fear. But if you thought the Pagans were wild, wait till you meet the next club, Rebels to the Core. 5. The Rock Machine MC. In the early 1990s, the Hells Angels made their move. Their goal was domination, expanding their territory and take full control of Quebec, Canada's billion-dollar drug market. Smaller clubs like the Rock Machine were expected to either join or disappear. But the Rock Machine refused. And that single decision sparked one of the bloodiest biker wars in history. From 1994 to 2002, the Quebec Biker War turned Montreal into a battlefield. Assassinations happened in broad daylight. Innocent people, even children, were caught in the crossfire. Over 160 lives were lost. For Canada, it was a wake-up call. Biker gangs weren't just rowdy, they were organized militias. At first, the Rock Machine held their ground, but as the years dragged on, internal pressure and mounting losses pushed many members to patch over to the Bandidos, weakening the original club. They lost the war, but not their identity. The name still echoes in Canada and parts of Europe. Today, the Rock Machine is a shadow of its former self. Smaller, quieter, but still standing. They didn't plan to become legends of violence, but when the Hells Angels came for them, they fought back. If that was brutal, the next club takes it even further. 6. The Warlocks MC. The Warlocks weren't born from chaos, they brought order to it. Formed in 1967 in Orlando, Florida, by Navy veterans returning from Vietnam, these men had already seen war up close. But instead of leaving the battlefield behind, they built one on American soil. With military discipline and bonds forged under fire, the Warlocks weren't just a motorcycle club. They were a combat unit in leather vests. Their most infamous moment came on a Florida highway where a pack of Warlocks was ambushed. Bullets tore through bikes and bodies. It wasn't a random hit. It was a direct result of their ongoing feud with the Hells Angels. That ambush wasn't the start, but it confirmed just how far the war had gone. And the rivalry? Still alive today. The Warlocks never grabbed headlines like the Hells Angels, but that was their edge. They survived the decades by staying low, staying ready, and never blinking in a fight. With only around 300 to 400 members, they're not the biggest, but they're one of the hardest to kill. They didn't seek fame. They came home from the war and built their own, while Warlocks fought for their reflection. The next went straight for the Hells Angels. Sip to Gremium MC. In 2005, tensions reached a boiling point outside a bar in Duisburg, Germany, when Gremium, Mac, and Hells Angels members confronted each other. A fight erupted, and by the time it ended, 2 men were dead and many lay injured. That wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Police launched a storm of raids, uncovering weapons, drugs, and maps of territory. The message was clear. Germany was now a battlefield, and Gremium had no plans to give up ground. Gremium MC was born in 1972 in Mannheim, starting as a small, tight-knit club. They didn't want to dominate the world, just protect their own. But as they grew, spreading into Austria, Poland, Spain, they knew outsiders would come. And when the Hells Angels did, Gremium didn't flinch. They've never signed peace deals. They've never played politics. Instead, they built their reputation on unity, discipline, and an unshakable belief in defending what's theirs. Today, their black and white patch still rides across Europe, a symbol that says, "This territory is claimed, and we don't run." The Gremium MC was dangerous in the shadows, but the next one did it in broad daylight. Comancheros MC. It was March 22, 2009, at Sydney Airport when the ongoing feud between the Comancheros and the Hells Angels turned violent in the open. Both club leaders, Comanchero boss Mick Howie and Hells Angels president Derek Wainohu, had just flown on the same flight from Melbourne to Sydney. Tensions were already high during the flight. Once they landed, members from both sides started sending texts, and a full-blown fight broke out in Terminal 3 in front of travelers. Witnesses saw men pick up heavy metal posts, weighing up to 17 kilograms, and swing them like weapons. One Hells Angels supporter, Anthony Zervas, who was the brother of a high-ranking member, was beaten to death. 14 other men joined the fight. Some ran off in taxis once it was over. It was violent, loud, and impossible to ignore. After the airport killing, the government responded quickly. The New South Wales Premier increased the size of the anti-gang police unit, and new national laws were discussed to crack down on biker violence. Several Comancheros were arrested. 6 of them were later convicted for taking part in the riot. Mick Howie was first found guilty of murder, but that decision was later changed. He pleaded guilty to manslaughter and served a shorter sentence. He got out on parole but was later shot and killed in 2018. Today, the Comancheros aren't just based in Australia. They've spread into Asia and the Middle East, and they're still rivals with the Hells Angels. The battles were loud until the next club showed up with a James Bond strategy, striking when the enemy least expected it. 9. The Rebels MC. Founded in Brisbane in 1969, the Rebels grew into the largest outlaw motorcycle club in the Southern Hemisphere, with over 2,000 members across Australia, New Zealand, Europe, and Southeast Asia. Tensions between Rebels and Hells Angels boiled over in the early 2000s when the Angels pushed into Australian turf. The Rebels fought back hard. By 2012, open war broke out at multiple places: gunfights in Sydney, Perth, and Adelaide, bombings, public brawls, and dozens of arrests. Then in 2020, things turned personal. Rebels boss Nick Martin came to blows with Hells Angels Sergeant-at-Arms Dane Brajkovic at a bar in Scarborough, Perth. The fight was over turf. Martin wanted to set up a tattoo shop in a suburb the Angels controlled. Days later, Martin was assassinated at a drag race, shot through the chest in front of a crowd. A hired sniper hit him from 300 meters away. The message was clear. This wasn't business, it was war. And the Rebels remain one of the few clubs still standing their ground against the Hells Angels. While the Rebels held their ground, the next club hunted down the Angels. Vagos MC. On Memorial Day weekend in 2022, what was supposed to be a peaceful motorcycle ride near Hoover Dam, Nevada, USA, a new chapter of a violent war unfolded. As members of the Vagos rode toward a veterans cemetery in nearby Boulder City, 3 Hells Angels, including the Las Vegas chapter president, opened fire on the group, injuring 6. The Vagos didn't get a chance to shoot back. They were ambushed. It was part of a long-running feud between 2 of the most dangerous outlaw clubs in the world. It all started in 1965 with the foundation of Vagos MC in San Bernardino, California, deep in Hells Angels territory. The Vagos called themselves the Green Nation. They grew fast and aggressively, expanding across the US, Mexico, Canada, and Europe, amassing over 4,000 members. Armed, organized, and unflinching, the Vagos gained power by hitting hard and refusing to back down. Their war with the Angels continues, fought in bars, highways, rallies, and public streets. They are born with conflict, and they carried it as their legacy. The next club lived up to their name, and it was deadly for Hell's Angels. 11th Devil's Disciples MC. The Devil's Disciples started in Michigan in the late 1960s. They operate mostly in Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio, with around 250 to 300 members. Known for building meth labs and stockpiling weapons, the club has long been on law enforcement's radar. In a major FBI operation, over 40 guns, explosives, and large amounts of meth were seized. Their national president was arrested and charged with drug trafficking, obstruction, and threatening witnesses. Clashes with the Hells Angels have happened over territory and drug routes in the Midwest. While there haven't been any high-profile shootouts between them, several smaller fights have taken place in bars and biker events. Injuries were reported, but few arrests were made. There's been no peace or settlement between the two clubs. Just quiet hostility and an understanding that both sides are willing to go violent if pushed. And while things were boiling over in the Midwest, down south, one gang was already turning highways into battlegrounds. 12th, the Iron Horsemen MC. In 2010, a deadly shootout occurred in Cincinnati, Ohio that left one Hells Angels member dead and several police officers injured. This is Iron Horsemen. The club began in the 1960s in the Midwest United States. From the beginning, the Iron Horsemen earned a reputation for armed actions. They built a culture of silence, loyalty, and violence. Later, they expanded to other states as well and established chapters in Ohio, Kentucky, and along the East Coast. Their operations include drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, and enforcement through force. Some members have military training, which adds to their threat level. The Iron Horseman has mastered the art of living under the radar. They focus on control and firepower behind the scenes, but the next do it in open. 13th Satan's Choice Club MC. Founded in Ontario in 1965, Satan's Choice quickly rose to power as one of Canada's largest outlaw motorcycle clubs. At their peak, they boasted over 400 members and controlled much of Ontario's drug trade, especially in methamphetamine distribution. Known for their independence and resistance to outside control, they clashed with the expanding Hells Angels during the late 70s and 80s. Violent confrontations followed, but the club held its ground for years. By the late 90s, however, internal pressure and law enforcement crackdowns weakened them. In 2000, many Satan's Choice chapters officially patched over to the Hells Angels in what some called a strategic merger, others a forced surrender. Today, the original name survives only in fragments, while the Hells Angels absorbed most of their influence and members. One club took the rivalry to the extreme, plotting the slaughter of Hells Angels in Laughlin, Nevada. 14th Sons of Silence MC. They don't post photos, they don't talk to press, but when they strike, the damage is unforgettable. This is Sons of Silence for you. Their conflict with the Hells Angels isn't loud, but it runs deep. Tensions reached a brutal turning point in 2002 during the Laughlin River Run in Nevada. The Sons didn't storm in wearing colors, they arranged the chaos. Rival clubs were stirred against the Angels inside a casino. When the fighting stopped, 3 bikers were dead and 12 wounded. The message, the Sons of Silence, knew how to make enemies bleed without leaving fingerprints. In 1999, the ATF called them one of the most heavily armed biker gangs in America. Federal raids uncovered automatic weapons, pipe bombs, and silencers. The club had been quietly building firepower across state lines, preparing for war, not with cameras, but with calculated violence. They have fewer members than the Angels, but what they lack in numbers, they make up in loyalty, discipline, and firepower. Today, the Sons of Silence remain largely in the shadows. But in biker circles, they're whispered about with caution, because if the Hells Angels are loud and proud, the Sons of Silence are the ones you never see coming. And finally, The last club on our list brought serious firepower and proved they were nothing to underestimate. 15th, No Surrender MC. Founded in 2013 by Klaus Otto, No Surrender MC quickly became one of Europe's most aggressive outlaw motorcycle clubs, built on speed, defiance, and a clear mission: challenge the Hells Angels. Pulling in seasoned bikers from rival clubs like the Bandidos and Satudara, the group expanded fast across the Netherlands and beyond. Between 2014 and 2016, violence erupted across cities like Rotterdam and Antwerp. Gunfights, arson, and car bombings turned the streets into war zones. Dutch police called it the Brotherhood War. Despite arrests and Otto's imprisonment, No Surrender kept growing, establishing chapters across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. In 2019, a Dutch court officially banned the club, calling it a threat to public order due to its violent culture and ongoing criminal activity. But like its name suggests, No Surrender continues to operate underground, one of the few clubs bold enough to go head-to-head with the Hells Angels. These were the ones bold enough to challenge the Hells Angels. But they're not the only ones with power. Some clubs have carved empires across continents. Click on the next video to see who controls the outlaw world and where they call the shots.